The type of signaling is determined by the distance between the message's source and where the message is received. First, we can have direct contact. This is where two cells are making physical contact with each other, the shortest distance. Second, paracrine signaling is where a cell will secrete a signal that diffuses toward adjacent target cells. Third, endocrine signaling is the only long-distance cell communication that we will discuss. Endocrine signaling involves ligands, specifically called hormones, that travel through the circulatory system to reach the target cells. Fourth, synaptic signaling, where the ligand, specifically called a neurotransmitter, passes from the nerve cell through a gap between the nerve cell and the target cell. So let's take a closer look. Direct contact signaling is like tapping someone on the shoulder to get their attention. The signal is localized between just you and the other person and is a short-term interaction. This could be due to the interaction of the two molecules, such as the proteins and the glycoproteins embedded in the plasma membrane of two neighboring cells interacting with each other. Alternatively, adjacent cells often have protein-lined channels between neighboring cells. These are called gap junctions in animal cells and plasmodesmata in plants. These little portals allow neighboring cells to have direct contact with each other's cytoplasm. This means that solutes, including ligands, can be transported from one cell to another without having to enter the extracellular matrix. An example of this is how heart cells signal contractions by passing calcium ions through the gap junctions. This higher positive charge is important for maintaining the correct electrical charge that keeps hearts beating. The paracrine signaling is like a group of friends having a quiet conversation at a coffee shop. There's not necessarily direct contact going on between individuals, but the conversation is intended for the small group of people for the short amount of time that they're at the coffee shop. In paracrine signaling, the message is excreted from a nearby cell. The ligand travels a short distance before binding to the receptor proteins on the target cell or cells. The effects are localized to just the nearby cells, just like a conversation at a coffee shop. An example of this is how cancer cells spread. A cancerous tumor cell usually starts when there is a mutation in the DNA that codes for the proteins that regulate cell reproduction, resulting in a rapid growth of tumor cells. The tumor cells sound out a growth signal that triggers cell division. These growth factors can affect the tumor cell itself and neighboring healthy cells with unmutated DNA. When the healthy cells receive the growth signal factors, they will also start to divide, even if they don't have damaged DNA. Endocrine signaling is the only long-distance signaling and the only type of signaling that has long-term effects. My analogy here requires me to show my nerdiness. Remember that part of the Harry Potter movies when Harry and Ron Weasley's dad, Arthur, go to the Ministry of Magic because, I don't know, Harry had to go there for reasons, I don't remember. When they get to the elevator, there's a bunch of paper airplanes flying around their heads. The paper airplanes hold memos for interdepartmental communication. I'm glad that we use Microsoft Teams at the college so that I don't have to worry about getting hit in the head with flying paper airplanes. In the endocrine signaling, endocrine glands will produce hormones. These are the ligands in this type of cell communication, and excrete them into the bloodstream to be carried toward the target cells. The effects of hormones have the longest lasting effects of all the four types of cell communication that we're looking at. Insulin is a smallish polypeptide hormone that's produced in the beta cells of the pancreas. When the glucose concentration of the bloodstream reaches a critical level, insulin is released into the bloodstream. Glucose can then be transported into the target cells with the supervision of the insulin molecule. There are many types of glucose transporters, and insulin is required only for the GLUT4 if anyone wants to be extra nerdy about it. Synaptic signaling is where neurotransmitters, the ligand, are released by a nerve cell, travel through the synaptic gap, and bind with the receptor proteins embedded in the plasma membrane of the target cell. These signals can target other neurons in the brain or spinal cord, the muscle cells to trigger muscle contractions, or in glandular cells to stimulate the secretion of hormones, saliva, digestive enzymes, a bunch of other stuff. And this is why I use the analogy of a relay race for synaptic signalings. We're going to start with the neurotransmitters, and then we're going to have trigger other signalings from there. Because I have a pretty great case of ADHD, I'm using this as our example. For many years, it was assumed that ADHD is due to the lack of the transmitter dopamine. However, recent research is showing that the story is a little more complicated. There's probably more than one neurotransmitter that's lacking, or the receptor proteins for dopamine and other neurotransmitters might not function as well as neurotypical people